Good morning, and thank you very much for the invitation to this panel. In the next 10 to 12 minutes, I'd like to give you a brief overview about a public web portal on climate change and related environmental issues. It's a portal that's updated several times a day by gathering collective intelligence from various stakeholders. More specifically, we collect and analyze several millions of documents and postings, and then we select about 10,000 most relevant postings and articles in the climate change domain. And in the second slide, you can actually see the sources that we are aggregating. We aggregate environmental organizations, news media, Fortune 1000 companies, blogs, and various social medias, including Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and Google. For each of these stakeholder groups, we identify the major topics that this stakeholder group associates. We compute the attention and the sentiment, so not only how often are these topics mentioned, but also are they portrayed in a positive or negative light. This allows us, among other things, to track semantic and geographic trends and also visualize them through various maps. The overarching goal is really to create shared meaning, to gather and analyze collective intelligence, and to help understand how others perceive climate change. Our second goal is to provide tools to the public, for example, environmental organizations, so that they're able to analyze the knowledge from these stakeholders and also to engage them and to optimize their communication strategies. Before I'm going to show you a few examples that are taken from our portal, on the next slide I'll like to give you a bit of an overview of the major interface elements. By the way, on www.ecoresearch.net/climate you can test drive this live. This is all public. As you see on this slide, on the upper end, the sources and settings, you can specify which source you want to investigate. So do you want to investigate news media or social media, for example? The date, so it's not only a snapshot, it's a complete archive spanning several years by now. On the left hand, you have the topic management. This is where you have a number of predefined topics, but you're also able to specify your own topics. You have trend charts that have a default view of the last 2 months. Underneath, the content view, where you can read the postings and articles. In the lower left corner, marked green in this slide, you have the search results. And on the right side, various types of visualizations that you can switch on and off and that are all synchronized both with each other and also with the search results. On the next slides, you'll find the first concrete example of this technology. A query for Rio +20 coverage on news media. You see on the left side the actual topics, and you can select there which of these topics should be shown in the chart. The chart itself shows several data series. You can show the frequency of the coverage. You can show the sentiment of coverage, positive, negative, and also disagreement. So you can easily pick up which are those topics where the polarity of the coverage is most heterogeneous. What you also see in this screenshot is it's all real time and you have mouse over effect. So if you see a peak or some interesting pattern in the data stream, you just mouse over this peak and you immediately see the keywords associated with this term. If you click on it, you get a list of the articles that are actually responsible for this peak. Underneath, you see an automatically generated summary of the document and a little yellow star, which you'll also find on the right side in the various maps, which is the active document. It's the, if you like, you are here indicator in this information space. In the lower left corner, you have the associations that news media have with Rio +20. So these are really computed on the fly. So you have between February and April 2012, news media sources associate these terms with Rio +20. And you see the counts. These are frequency counts, the numbers next to the terms. And the color coding indicates if they are predominantly in a positive or negative context dimensions. On the right side, you have a similar document view, which just is like a search result list, which shows you all the top search results for this query. And you see little markers, A to E, which are then also shown on the right side in the maps. They're projected, for example, on the geographic map, which you see in the lower right corner. So you see the global coverage on Rio plus 20. You see it's predominantly positive. And of course, the center of it is in Brazil. Above, you also see a tech cloud. You're all familiar with the concept of a tech cloud. We also encode the sentiment information. So in addition to showing how popular a term is by its size, we also use color coding to distinguish the positive and negative terms. In the upper right corner, you have an information landscape, which I'll explain in one of the follow-up slides. So on the next slide, there's a different example. So we're switching from news media to social media. And this is a query for actually Connect for Climate. And you'll see that the trend charts work in exactly the same manner. You just mouse over them to see what drives these peaks. The example that's shown here is on health. On the left side now, what you can see is that it's also possible to mix and match the predefined topics in the upper left corner and also the associations that are being computed in real time. So you can select any of these terms on the left side to be shown in the chart. Underneath, because it's a Twitter message, we also show some metadata. For example, the number of total tweets and the number of followers. Instead of the list of search results that you saw in the previous example, here we now have a keyword graph. You see we have several tabs, so you can present the results in various ways. So this keyword graph computes the associations that you see on the left side and visualize them as an interactive graph. So when you try out the system live, you can just click on any of these topics and you can follow the areas that interest you. And a new visualization is also in the lower right corner, which is an ontology. So the system also gives the option to match the search results onto some ontological structure, but that's an optional component that does not need to be used in an application. On the next slide, you'll see the information landscape, the semantic map that I've already mentioned. Visualizations in general play a very important part in the Media Watch on climate change. They can be enlarged, as you can see here, and they're all synchronized with each other in real time, but also with the set of search results. So I'll just start again with the information landscape. I'm not sure if you can see it on the visualization, but you see little gray dots that are in the vicinity of these peaks. All these gray dots are actually documents, so we cluster those documents where you have a lot of documents centered around a central theme. We visualize a peak. The higher the peak, the more documents, and they're labeled by the major topics there. On the next slide, we switch to a geographic projection, which shows nicely that visualizations can be used for storytelling. So you can tell a story, you can track the unfolding of an event just by mapping search results onto a geographic map. On these visualizations, you see yellow is the source of the information, and red and green are the target of the information. So red and green shows where the search results are located, and the color again is positive and negative sentiment. The larger the marker, the more coverage on this particular location. And this is a query that was done for the time span between May and June 2010. And it was a query on oil spills. You see the associations again in the lower left corner. And it's quite obvious that most of the coverage on oil spill during that time was very negative. What's unusual for our portal is the high percentage of UK coverage as of total coverage, which is easy to understand because of the involvement of BP. And you see in the upper left corner that also older news are being referenced, are discussed again. For example, this was the oil spill in 1989 in Alaska, which was also being discussed as part of the Gulf oil spill disaster. On the next slide, this shows how the analysis can be extended on a global scale. There are two examples. These two examples show queries on hurricane. A few months after the previous one. So the first one is in October 2010. There are no major events there on the US East Coast, but you see that the news media are discussing the threat and potential impact of hurricanes in the Gulf region. And the focus of the negative coverage during the time is actually in the Pacific, near the Philippines, which was reporting on the season's strongest tropical cyclone. In January 2011, you see a very similar picture, but the negative coverage in the Pacific has moved south. You see this large red marker, which was discussing the hurricane that hit Queensland in January, February 2011. In line with the theme of today's panel, Harnessing Collective Intelligence, I'd like to conclude my presentation with presenting you a current initiative that we've just launched 2 weeks ago. It also fits nicely to the previous presentation on crowdsourcing. It's our climate quiz, which is a Facebook application in tradition of Games with a Purpose. On the one hand, it's an entertaining way for Facebook users to test their environmental knowledge. For us, the scientific interest is to assess and validate the concepts and relations that we have extracted with the Media Watch on climate change. As you see in this example here, there are two concepts that were pulled out of 2011 media coverage, and we're asking users to pick the most appropriate relation to connect these two concepts. This concludes my presentation. On the last slide, you find two URLs. The first one gives you access to the systems tool that I've just presented, so they're all open and available. And the second link points you to a detailed description of the actual interface elements of the Media Watch on climate change, because I was not able, because of the time frame, to really show you all the functions there. So thank you for your attention, and I look forward to your questions.